Nancy was almost certain now that she and Helen had met at the unpleasant Mrs. Avon the night before. The woman's quarrelsome mood had extended to Laura. Aloud Helen said, "But don't forget, it's no fun to have car trouble on a bad night. That is a point to make anyone cross." "I suppose so," Laura conceded. "How was Mrs. Avon this morning?" Nancy asked. Laura's face brightened somewhat as she admitted that the woman had been pleasant and charming. Mrs. Avon apologized for her actions last night and said both she and her husband could hardly wait for me to come and live with them. "I see," said Nancy, but with inward reservations. "I guess I'm being foolish to worry." Laura smiled. Mrs. Avon did say that she had met Mother only once, so that could explain the name mix-up. "Where is Mr. Avon?" Helen asked. "He's arriving after lunch today. He was detained on business." Nancy was puzzled. The Avon's behavior was unusual and thoughtless, she felt. "Mrs. Avon is having her hair set at the beauty parlor in the hotel," Laura explained. "She suggested that I take a taxi here this morning if I felt I had to see you too, which I insisted I did," Laura said, grinning cheerfully. Suddenly Nancy smiled. "I'm starved." She asked Laura to have a second breakfast with her and Helen in the motel restaurant. "And afterward," Helen went on, "let's ask Marty Malone, the girl we met yesterday, Nancy, to make a foursome in tennis." "Great," said Laura, to both suggestions. When the three girls stepped outside, Nancy took a deep breath of air. She loved the earthy smell of the forest surrounding the lake resort, particularly the scent of the tall pines. "What a day!" she exclaimed. Only a few fleecy white clouds broke the clear blue sky. "The weatherman must be on our side," Helen chuckled. A little later, Nancy lent Laura tennis clothes, and the girls went to meet Marty Malone. Soon the four were playing a lively set on the courts located behind the motel. Laura and Nancy, who were partners, won. Helen and Marty took the second set. "You are a terrific player, Nancy," Laura exclaimed as she scored a point during set 3. "Thanks," Nancy said as they changed courts for service. "Where did you learn to play so well?" "Private lessons," Laura grimaced. "At boarding school. Mother insisted before her illness. She was a great sportswoman." When Nancy and Laura had won the third set, Laura called for time out. "I must go back to the hotel now," she said. "It's almost noon." After Laura had changed her clothes, Nancy offered to drive her to the hotel. The three girls piled into Nancy's blue convertible. 10 minutes later, they drew up in front of the spacious Montevideo Hotel. It was several stories high and stood a long distance back from the main road. In front stretched a green lawn bordered by beds of multicolored gladioli, dahlias, and giant asters. "It's beautiful," Nancy commented as Laura stepped out from the car. Helen pointed to an attractive outdoor swimming pool to the right of the hotel. It was filled with bathers. Laura said that there was also a riding stable behind Montevideo. "There are a lot of families here," Laura said wistfully. "I wish I could stay." Then hastily she thanked Nancy for driving her over. "I've loved doing it," Nancy replied. "I hope we see each other again, Laura." "So do I," Helen added. Laura snapped her fingers. "I have a wonderful idea. Why don't you girls come back around 3 o'clock? You can meet my guardians." And if there's time, you can join the other young people at tea dance scheduled at 4:04. Fine, Nancy said at once. Come directly to my room. Laura waved goodbye. Nancy detected a worried expression on Laura's face, and knew she hated the thought of meeting her strange new guardian. The young sleuth was so quiet on the return trip that Helen said, "Penny for your thoughts, Nancy?" Her friend smiled. "I've concluded that the Pendletons must have been wealthy." "What gives you that idea?" "It's very expensive to live year-round in New York hotels, where Laura lived, and she also mentioned boarding school. In addition," Nancy enumerated, "Laura's clothes have that simple but expensive look. You know what I mean?" "Yes," said Helen. "Well, if you're right, Mr. Avon would control a great deal of money while he's managing Laura's affair." "In the case of a minor," said Nancy, "an inheritance is held in trust until she is 21. That says that's 5 years for Mr. Avon. I hope he'll be a wise guardian." She turned onto Lakeview Lane, a long straight road bordered by woods. There were no homes along the way, but a sign ahead advertised Sterling's real estate office. Suddenly Nancy stopped. "I think I'll run in here for a minute," she said, "and ask who owns that bungalow we helped ourselves to." She walked into the office, introduced herself to Mr. Sterling, an elderly man, and told him the purpose of her call. The realtor grinned. "Any port in a storm is all right, I'm sure." She said that the bungalow was owned by one of his clients. He had rented it a week before to a Mrs. Frank Marshall from Pittsburgh. "I guess she fixed up the second floor," Mr. Sterling added. "She and her husband plan to use the place for a week. I'll pass the word along to Mrs. Marshall that you were there." "I left a note but didn't sign it," Nancy said. "Perhaps sometimes I will stop in person and thank the Marshalls." Returning to the car, she told Helen what she had learned. "Just for the fun, let's go out to the bungalow now." A quarter of a mile further on, Nancy made a right turn, which brought them on the lake drive. Below them, the girls could see the bungalow they had visited. Suddenly, a black foreign car pulled out of the lane and led out to the bungalow. Gaining speed, the automobile came towards Nancy's convertible. "Watch out!" Helen yelled, jerking to attention as the vehicle passed and nearly sideswiped them. Nancy slowed down and stopped. She looked back at the car, which was almost out of sight. "Some drivers don't deserve a license," she said. "Do you suppose that was Mr. Marshall?" Helen shrugged. He wore a straw hat put low over his forehead. All I could see was the sleeve of his tan and white jacket. "That's quite a bit," Nancy teased, "in so short a time." Helen laughed. "Close association with you is making me more observant," she said. When the girls reached the Pinecrest Motel, Helen exclaimed, "There's Aunt June."